Welcome to the all-new Silicon Valley Vibes, a podcast from SVLG. I'm your new AI announcer, VJ. We'll still bring you the latest on the people, platforms, and places of the one-of-a-kind ecosystem of Silicon Valley. But now, we'll also do it on video. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. Today, SVV welcomes Microsoft's Shawn Villaron. He's Vice President of Microsoft Office, and he's site leader for the Microsoft Bay Area region. He'll talk about his own career path, and then about new data from Microsoft's Work Trend Index report on how job journeys are changing today with AI and with agents. Bringing you that conversation is our SVV host, Peter Leroe-Muñoz, SVLG General Counsel and SVP of Tech Policy. Peter, take it away.
Shawn, it's great to have you join us. Let's start with your background. How did you come to your present role, and what do your responsibilities include?
Yeah, well, first off, Peter, thank you so much for inviting me onto the podcast today. So I started as a classic nerdy kid growing up in Stockton, California. My dad came home one day completely out of the blue with a Commodore VIC-20, and I immediately took it out of the box and fell in love. It was the device that allowed me to explore through my imagination. I could create things out of nothing, and became that classic computer geek in the neighborhood, upgraded to a whole Commodore 64, and spent hours of my childhood just in front of computers. Ended up at the University of Southern California studying computer engineering, computer science. And long story short, ended up with an internship in the Bay Area at Microsoft as a product manager on PowerPoint. Can't tell you, those 12 weeks, completely fell in love. Company, technology, the people, the product. Had a chance to come back the next summer, and it was just more greatness. And so I knew at the end of that summer that Microsoft was the place that I wanted to have a career.
Well, that's excellent. You definitely have that history going back all the way from 96 to present day with that company. So I think it's appropriate, given you've seen so much of the modern office environment change during that time, to talk about Microsoft's new report. They put out an annual Work Trend Index that captures developments, changes, and insights into professional activities. What are some of the biggest trends that you identified this year in 2025?
Yeah, the WTI, or Work Trend Index report, is something we've been doing for about 5 years. It actually started earlier when the COVID was happening and we were transitioning people from in-person work to remote work. And a couple of years ago, we started to put an AI angle to it. So this was a 31,000 global survey where we ended up taking in information from economists, from scientists, really understanding how is the future of work changing, what is the role that AI is having in that change. And this year, what's really interesting is there are three big takeaways from my perspective. 2025 is going to be a seismic year of change for most companies. This is the year where about 82% of leaders say we need to pause and look at our strategy. How are we running these companies? How do we make the shape of the companies? How do we evaluate the productivity of these companies? And part of this is that 81% of them see an opportunity to add to their productivity capacity. And the way they're going to do that is with AI and agents. And this is going to happen in the next 12 to 18 months. The other big takeaway, I think, for this year for the Work Trend Index report is that leaders are now leading again. In 2024, it was the employees who were bringing AI into the workplace. It was the employees who were creating what we call the power user cohort. They were the ones experimenting and learning how AI could transform their business. Well, in 2025, the leaders are leading again. They are the ones who can see the future. They are the ones who can see the opportunity. And then lastly, what we're seeing is the emergence of what we call a frontier firm, which is a completely new way of running an organization in this era of AI.
Well, I like that term, frontier firm. So what are the characteristics of this new type of firm? And what are the opportunities and maybe some of the complexities that arise with this new type of organization?
Yeah, so frontier firms really start with one principle, and that is org-wide deployment of artificial intelligence. In 2024, it was fine to do a little pilot here, a little pilot there, but really in 2025, we're looking at pushing AI broadly across the org. Now, once you do that, there are three things that emerge. One is the ability to have intelligence on tap, and that's a completely new way of using intelligence within an organization. The other characteristic we see within a frontier firm is what we call hybrid teams. So these are teams of humans and agents working together. And then thirdly, there's an entirely new set of roles that will show up in these frontier firms. We often refer to them as agent bosses. But so there's a whole new discipline that we're going to see showing up in these companies that we call frontier firms. And what's really interesting is when you put these three things together, intelligence on tap, hybrid teams, and agent bosses, these companies have the ability to scale rapidly. They have the ability to be dynamic to changing business conditions and effectively deliver faster results to their shareholders, to their customers, to their peers. And what's really interesting to me is when I think about the word firm, I had to get over my preconceived ideas of what a firm is. Like when I think firm, I think global, big, multinational. But the reality is that frontier firms are on all different scales. Yes, they are big multinationals, but we see 5-person startups. We see 5-person nonprofits that are looking like frontier firms. And so we have to keep in mind that it's not just for the big organizations, the big companies. Even the smallest organizations can take advantage of this notion of a frontier firm.
This all is incredible stuff, thinking about where the work trends are going and a lot of opportunity there. But are there any complexities or challenges that organizations should be thinking about as they more fully integrate AI into their operations?
Yeah, I think one of the things is that we have to recognize everyone's going in this way. In 2 to 5 years, rather, every organization will be on their journey towards becoming a frontier firm. And one of the big challenges they're going to have to overcome is this idea of working with agents. And it is a little bit of a culture change. Before, it's always a human to human. You have those relationships. We have to get people to think of these agents as extensions of them. They are teammates. They are partners that we're going to collaborate with. And that's a pretty significant cultural change that people will need to think about. Another aspect of this is really, how do you shape the organization? How many agents can an agent boss manage? How do you design the agents themselves? How do the agents work together? How do you avoid oversight fatigue? If all we're doing is managing agents, you could run into that particular problem. And so this is an area where we're sort of working with lots of different companies to understand, how does this evolve? What are the challenges they run into? What are those techniques that are actually helping them overcome some of these problems? And this, to me, really sort of reflects on some of the learnings from the WTI in 2024, where as you're experimenting with AI, it's important to celebrate the wins, but also to celebrate where you find out it doesn't work so that you can actually try it again and see if there's another way of overcoming the challenge. And then most importantly, sharing these results. The amount of time that we spend at Microsoft sharing how we're using AI with our peers, you'd be shocked. I mean, most of our conversations are around, hey, this worked, or I tried this and this didn't work. That's going to be something that these companies that are embracing AI and embracing agents are going to have to lean into. You got to share these experiences.
Well, I want to go back for a moment to another term that you seem to have coined here. So you get credit for being the originator of this, but this idea of intelligence on tap. How is this different from previous understandings of business intelligence and human capital?
Yeah, previously intelligence was a scarce resource. It wasn't something that you could dial up or down at any given moment. But we're on the precipice of this changing. Intelligence is now an on-demand, completely scalable, always available resource. And so you have the ability to think of it almost as if we're about the same age. Remember, there were days where you'd go out and you'd buy a 300 baud modem. And if my sister happened to pick the phone up, she would break my internet connection. Like, that's how delicate internet access was. And it was scarce and it was precious. A couple weeks ago, I was on a flight to Australia, flying over the Pacific Ocean, and I had reasonably high-speed internet the entire time. That's the kind of change we're looking for here with intelligence. Intelligence will be this scalable resource that we can take advantage of at any given moment. And the reason this is so incredibly important is that the WTI research shows there's very clearly a capacity gap in our enterprises, in our companies, in our organizations. And we can look at it from two perspectives. About 53% of leaders say they have to deliver more productivity. At the same time, 80% of people are tapped out. They simply cannot they don't have the energy, they don't have the time to complete their job. And so this creates this significant gap that is worrisome for a lot of leaders. And I know, personally that this resonates with me. The data shows that we get interrupted every 2 minutes. Your watch going off, a Teams message coming in, text message from your cell phone, email coming in, your boss calling you. These things all add up to productivity losses. And so the idea of taking intelligence, in particular with AI and agents, will help us actually bridge that gap. And the way that I get excited about it, the thing that gets me the most excited is I think about the CEO in a classic American company. Think of the team that they have around them. They probably have a chief of staff, maybe a team of admins to manage calendaring and logistics. They probably have a communication director. And they probably have a bunch of subject matter experts, maybe HR people, technical advisors, et cetera. Their productivity is a function of the power of that team. Well, it's cost prohibitive to give every employee in a company that team until you think about that team as a team of agents. Now we have the ability to arm every person in every organization of every size with those kind of resources around them. And that is the way that we're going to bridge this capacity gap. And we're going to start driving increased productivity in these organizations.
I think any company wants to look for ways to increase their productivity. And I like the through line that you made from intelligence on tap to actionable productivity. But I think there are a lot of companies and organizations that are out there who maybe want to utilize and deploy AI tools and technology in their operations, but they may not necessarily know where to start. So if you were talking with some of those executives on those teams or organizations, what information or suggestions would you give them about first steps that they can take to better integrate AI into their operations?
Yeah, I love this question because it's pretty common for people to have a little bit of apprehension to take that first step. And I would say two things. One is it's not optional. You actually have to do this. If you don't do this, you're going to get passed by. And all the research is incredibly clear that a single individual with an agent, with a bunch of artificial intelligence, is going to be more successful, more productivity than an individual without using AI. And that translates to teams, that translates to companies. And so you're not really allowed to stay on the sidelines on this one. You have to lean in or you're gonna pay the consequences for it. So how do you do it? Well, I was talking to a company a couple months ago. It's the law firm, and they were walking me through the delicate nature of attorney-client privilege information. And they said, Shawn, if any of this information got out, or if any of it was used to train a model, that could be the end of our business. And so we're very apprehensive to lean into AI. So what do we do? And so we talked a little bit about their business, and what we recognized is that there were entire jobs to be done, entire workflows within their organization that were mission critical that had nothing to do with attorney-client privilege. So we said, let's apply AI to those workflows. Let's understand how it works. Let's understand what works and what doesn't, and what guardrails you can create from a policy perspective. Do this, don't do this. In this particular case, you need to run it by this person. In this particular case, you need to run it by this person. And once you build that success on step one, then you look for the next business problem and you try it again. And then you will eventually create enough understanding of the domain, enough understanding of what works and what doesn't, enough understanding of where those tricky lines are that you'll be able to have that corporate strategy. And so again, it is really find that first business case that's safe, experiment with it, learn, and then expand.
Makes perfect sense. And a lot of folks are sharing that idea that with regard to AI and jobs and workforce, you might not necessarily lose your job to AI, but rather you might lose your job to somebody who uses AI. And so I think what you just said there really kind of highlights the need for folks to get off the sidelines, as you shared. Can you offer a few examples of companies that are already deploying AI to productive effect?
If we look at that Work Trend Index report, about 800 people who responded already work for a frontier firm. And so that's great because that tells us there are lots of these frontier firms out there. If we look just at the Bay Area, we've got a couple of great examples. Wells Fargo is a wonderful example where they recognize that the time it takes bankers to find information is a really important part of their success. The shorter it takes you to find that information, to be able to generate the insight, to be able to act on it, it's going to be a better outcome for the business. And so they've used agents to accelerate the searching capabilities of about 35,000 bankers spread out across 4,000 branches. 75% of their searches go through an AI agent. But the number that blows my mind away, instead of the searches taking about 10 minutes to find the information, it's down to about 30 seconds. Think of the productivity gains, the speed, the advantage you get when you can find information that fast, generate the insight, and make the decision. And so Wells Fargo is a great example, but again, Stanford Medicine is another local great frontier firm. They do these tumor board meetings where they get a bunch of physicians together to come up with a treatment plan. And so they're using AI to understand or to analyze structured and unstructured data so they can generate the best medical outcome for their clients. But again, the notion of firms, it doesn't have to be these big companies like Stanford Medicine or Wells Fargo. There's a small, I think it's about a 5-person company, industrialized construction group. They're using AI and their margins are up 20%. So you don't have to be a big multinational. It can be a group of 5 people who can drive value. And there are countless other stories. There's one story about a startup where they were considering hiring a CFO and they decided, you know what? AI can solve the CFO needs given where they were in their growth cycle. And so there really is, lots and lots of these examples, frontier firms of all scales and all sizes.
Well, that's great to hear that people are already using this in so many different ways. Let me ask you, going back to that Work Trend Index report, were there any findings that surprised you?
Well, I'd say the one that sort of terrified me was this notion of how frequently people are interrupted. The notion, it's every 2 minutes. It's about 250, 260 times a day. And when I think about my team, the resources we have working on building PowerPoint, and to think about the productivity we lose because of these interruptions, that was a bit of a wake-up call for me. And so immediately it turned into problem solving. How do we use AI to avoid some of these things so that we can actually diminish the impact they have on productivity? But that was the one that I think really sort of scared me a bit. Every 2 minutes of an interruption, when you scale that across the company, it's a significant hit to productivity.
Yeah, I feel that personally. I get those calls all the time, those texts, and you're trying to have heads down time to work on a project, and it is difficult to get that focus back when you are interrupted. As we consider, again, the idea of an agent boss, you talked about how organizations and companies can begin their process to get on the road to becoming more familiar with agent bosses and deploying those. But how do we get to a professional world where, as the index notes, every employee becomes an agent boss?
Yeah, I think it really starts with upskilling. That's going to be the key, is we're going to have to start thinking about how do we upskill the individual employees and how do we reshape the companies? And so when we look at the Bay Area, for example, 77% of our leaders are familiar with agents. That's compared to about 67% global. So again, we've got another one of these cases where the Bay Area is going to lead in this transformation. So our leaders need to be thinking about what is the right org shape and org size for these hybrid teams? What is the ratio of human to agents? How do agents work with other agents? How do we shape that communication? How do we audit that information? How do we measure that information? And so there's a lot of organizational structure that we have to think about. But we also have to be upskilling our employees. The skill needs that we need to turn people into agent bosses, they're out there, but we've got to find a way to give our people an opportunity to learn those new skills, experiment, and figure out how they can add value. If we look at the WTI data, 78% of leaders are looking at hiring these AI-specific roles. And if you look at some of the differences between Bay Area startups and big tech, the top AI startups are hiring twice the rate of these big tech startups. So the startups are really sort of experimenting with these AI-specific roles, the agent boss, somebody to figure out the shape of these organizations. And so for me, the thing from a personal perspective is upskilling. If we look at my part of the world, we have these incredible software engineers. They got 20 years of experience building the world's most sophisticated, scalable software. But in order to transition to the future, they need new skills. We will do this through giving them opportunities and trainings. And again, to the point we talked about earlier, sharing our experiences. Hey, I just tried this. You should do the same thing. And we want this to happen not just between teams within companies, but we want companies talking to each other, sharing what worked over here works over there. Or most importantly, perhaps what didn't work over here. You may not want to try it over there. And so I think the sharing of information is going to be incredibly, incredibly important.
Well, Shawn, I'm going to ask you now to look into your crystal ball. As you think about the Work Trends Index 2026, what developments or trends do you expect might appear next year?
I think the trend that I think might happen is the role of earlier in career employees having an outsized impact on our companies. And this is one of the things that gets me most excited about this AI moment we find ourselves in. The people who are new in career, early in career, coming right out of the university, If I could give them one recommendation, it is to become an AI expert. Lean into AI, get those skills, become a tinkerer. Because as you enter the workforce, as you join nonprofits and organizations and enterprises, there is no rule book. There's no playbook that tells us exactly how this is going to happen. And so if you can come in there and show us how to get more productivity, how to do things we could only dream of before with the technology at hand, you're going to be more valuable. And so I really do think that when we skip ahead to 2026, it's going to be the earlier career people bringing in new perspectives, bringing in incredible AI skills, and frankly, an experimentation forward mental model that I think is going to actually transform the world. That's my prediction for next year.
Shawn, you are so incredibly prescient. Not only did you come up with a very realistic and likely trend, but you also predicted my last question, which is going to be how, what advice can you offer young professionals who are just beginning their career? So I think you already just nailed that. And I really like the note on which we kind of find ourselves here, in that we look to new and younger generations to bring their own experiences to bear on a new technology as we're all kind of working together. Shawn, how can people reach you and find out more about your work?
Well, Peter, I love talking to people. This is one of those things I'm super passionate about. I love sharing our story, but I also love hearing from other people. How are they viewing WTI? How are they viewing AI? I'm super active on LinkedIn, so I would love people to reach out, connect with me, follow me, and really keep this conversation going, because I do think, to your earlier point, this is a journey we're going to be on for years, and we'll see how prescient I was about that 2026 answer. So the other thing is we've got a great Microsoft Bay Area blog. And yeah, this will cover things like WTI, but it'll also talk about a lot of the really great work that's happening out of Microsoft's Bay Area offices. And so I would encourage everybody to pay attention to that blog and go back to it periodically.
Shawn, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing an inside perspective into Microsoft, artificial intelligence, and the Workforce Trend Index report. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Peter. Really appreciate the opportunity.
And that closes out this episode of SVV. Thanks again to Shawn and Peter for that conversation on where work is taking people and AIs today. Shout out to SVLG and to producer R.R. Robbins for editing and mastering this episode. And thanks to Microsoft for their digital assets in making it. If you get a chance, like, share, and review this episode, it really helps. And subscribe to our YouTube channel for more stories like this. Remember, with a million stories in our innovation ecosystem, you can't always get all the details. But you can get the vibes right here on Silicon Valley Vibes. For now, this is VJ signing off. See you next time.